You have arrived at the Selby Botanical Gardens, historic Spanish Point campus.
A sanctuary on Little Sarasota Bay. Historic Spanish Point is full of natural beauty.
You today are following a tradition of people from around this region kind of honing in on this place and coming here for a very, very long time.
The first to admire and benefit from this paradise were archaic people 5,000 years ago and Minnesota culture a few thousand years later. And of course, they used the bay as their lifeline, stacking up shells, bones, and other materials to essentially make this entire peninsula.
Because this is one of the only Native American shell mounds in Florida that projects out into a bay. Usually they're parallel to the shoreline.
This is awesome.
You can see how it declines in elevation here. This is kind of the spring in the middle. Like I say, if you didn't see all the vegetation, it would look like a big bowl.
A big bowl surrounding what's believed to be a natural spring.
We know from some of the contents of the shells that were consumed that this was a summertime gathering place even.
Today, it's surrounded by mangroves, ferns, towering oak trees draped with Spanish moss and other native vegetation that is taken back over.
So much of this property is associated with, boats and shipping and, the bays were the highways, back in the early days.
Spanish fisher people moved into this prime fishing location, and it was believed to be one of 3 camps in Sarasota in the 17 and 1800s.
And it would have been a natural place because it's elevated by the Native Americans. They've got an abundance of seafood, and then a quick route, south back to Havana.
The Webbs, a homesteading family from New York, caught word of this prime location.
They had been told about the site when they were in Key West by a gentleman they called a Spanish trader, a guy from Cuba who had been up here along the coast, and he said, you got to find this place with these big shell mounds and build your house there and you can have a garden and you'll be prosperous. And so when they came, they wrote a letter back to New York and said, we've arrived at the Spanish Point.
And the next generation to thrive from this location begins.
So this is the old Webb packing house, and this was built originally in the 1870s.
Vegetables and fruits were being rolled out of this location. It was one of the first packing houses in the area.
It just goes to show how sometimes very simple devices can be used to be more efficient.
Artifacts from the mound were being found while farming, so of course, the scientists headed down here and needed a place to stay.
This is right after the American Civil War. There are very few people living here. And for these scientists to be able to come down here, live in the home of the homesteader, rent some rooms, rent rooms here also, and then go exploring was really a pivotal thing for the history of this property.
Like in the beautifully crafted Guptill home sitting on top of the mound. And when you walk through the threshold, you're walking back in time.
So this house was built in 1901. So this is still pioneer era, but it's not the earliest buildings in this part of Florida. But this was built by a shipbuilder, and so it has very nice details.
It became a small little town nestled in the woods, and they had homes, a stunning chapel with original stained glass windows overlooking the bay.
This is White Cottage, and this was one of the first B&Bs, if you will, in the area.
They even had a little post office for what they wanted to call Little Sarasota.
The Postal Service said, sounds too much like adjacent town, come up with another name, and they came up with Osprey.
Bertha Palmer ended up purchasing the land in 1910 and wanted to keep the pioneer buildings, and she added a little flair to them, with some of the most beautiful gardens in the area, like the Sunken Gardens.
So if you could imagine you climbing up the Indian Mound and you're coming down this trail, and then you enter this garden, it's like a room in nature, and that was her whole idea.
She brought water into the gardens with Italian-inspired white columns with a vibrant pop of pink. They bring that lavish feel to the natural scenery overlooking the clear blue water.
This is just an amazing historic garden that actually helped to save the Indian Mound that it's sitting upon. Because instead of her leveling all the mounds like a lot of people did, she saw the contours as a way to build this beautiful garden overlooking Little Sarasota Bay.
Or even the aqueduct she constructed, where spring water journeys through the jungle walk and ends in a calming shell cascade. We're wild about historic Spanish Point because it reminds us of the start of Southwest Florida. The old Florida feel is preserved, admired with every step along the pathway. The natural landscape is embraced and enhanced with every turn with lush native vegetation. The campus is a living window into our past.